In a small American town, on a rainy night, a poor mechanic named Ethan Parker helps a little girl whose artificial leg is broken. He doesn't ask for money, only wants to see her walk again. But what he doesn't know is, this simple act of kindness will change his life forever. Like, share, and subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. Now let's get started. The small town of Maple Springs woke up to another cloudy morning. The air smelled faintly of oil and metal near a rundown garage, where Ethan Parker, a 27-year-old mechanic, spent most of his days. His hands were always covered in grease, his overalls faded from years of hard work. The garage was his father's old place, now filled with tools, broken engines, and unpaid bills stacked in the corner. Business had been slow lately, but Ethan never turned away anyone who needed help, especially those who couldn't afford it. He believed kindness had a value beyond money. It was just after noon when the rain began to fall, tapping gently on the tin roof. Ethan was tightening a bolt on an old motorcycle when he heard a hesitant knock on the garage door. Wiping his hands on a rag, he opened it to see a woman standing there, drenched, holding a small umbrella over a little girl. The girl's leg brace looked bent, and her eyes carried both pain and embarrassment. The woman's voice trembled as she said, "Sir, my daughter's artificial leg broke. We don't have much, but could you please look at it?" Ethan's heart softened immediately. He motioned them inside to get out of the rain. "Don't worry about payment," he said kindly, kneeling down beside the girl. Her name was Lila, only 10 years old, her face pale but sweet. The leg's metal joint was cracked where the connector met the socket. It was an advanced prosthetic model, something Ethan hadn't seen often, but he understood machines well enough to know how to fix it. He smiled gently at Lila. "You're brave. Let's make sure you can walk again, okay?" Grace, Lila's mother, looked surprised and touched. "We've been to 2 clinics," she explained softly. "They said it would cost hundreds to replace. We just can't afford it right now." Ethan nodded without asking questions. He grabbed his toolbox and began working carefully, dismantling the damaged piece. The rain outside grew heavier, thunder echoing in the distance. The garage smelled of metal dust and oil, and the only sounds were the steady clinks of Ethan's tools and Lila's quiet breathing as she watched with wide eyes. After an hour of intense focus, Ethan realized the problem was worse than he thought. The metal pin had snapped in half, and the joint wouldn't hold unless he found a replacement. He searched through old drawers, boxes of scrap parts, and the shelves stacked with forgotten machinery. Finally, he found a small titanium rod, once part of a broken motorbike, that could work perfectly. "Got it," he whispered proudly to himself, then began reshaping it with his welding torch. Sparks flew across the dim workshop, lighting Ethan's determined face in orange glows. Lila flinched at the bright sparks, but giggled softly when Ethan turned and winked at her. "Don't worry, these sparks are just fireworks for heroes," he said with a grin. Grace smiled for the first time that day, tears glistening in her eyes as she watched this humble man work with so much care. She couldn't remember the last time someone had shown such kindness without expecting anything in return. Ethan adjusted the parts, tightened the new rod, and reassembled the leg's joint slowly to make sure everything fit perfectly. When he finished, he gently placed the prosthetic back on Lila's leg and locked it into place. "Try standing," he said softly. Lila hesitated, then gripped her mother's hand and slowly pushed herself up. The first moment was shaky, but then she stood straight, balanced and steady. Her eyes widened in disbelief. "It doesn't hurt!" she exclaimed with a joyful gasp. Ethan chuckled, feeling relief wash over him. "That's what we like to hear." Grace covered her mouth, tears streaming down as she hugged her daughter tightly. Grace tried to offer a few crumpled bills from her purse, but Ethan gently pushed her hand away. "Keep it," he said firmly. "Use it to get her something sweet instead." She protested, but he shook his head with a smile. "Sometimes a little kindness is worth more than a paycheck." Lila stepped forward and hugged him around the waist, whispering, "Thank you, mister." Ethan froze for a second, not used to affection, then gently patted her back, trying to hide the emotion rising in his chest. When they left, the rain had stopped. Ethan stood by the doorway, watching the little girl walk carefully beside her mother under the pale evening sky. The wet ground reflected the soft pink of the setting sun. He felt a deep calm inside him, the kind that came not from success or wealth, but from doing something good. He didn't know who they were or where they came from. All he knew was that he had helped someone who truly needed it, and that was enough. That night, Ethan sat alone in his small kitchen with a cup of coffee, staring at his worn-out hands. The garage light still glowed faintly through the window, and the sound of rain dripping from the roof filled the silence. He thought about the girl's smile, the look in her mother's eyes, and how something so small, just a bit of time, skill, and care, could change someone's day. He didn't know that his simple act of kindness was about to change his life, too, in ways he could never have imagined. A month had passed since that rainy afternoon. The days grew warmer, and Ethan continued his quiet life at the garage. Work came in slowly, a few old cars, lawnmowers, and the occasional motorcycle repair. His bank account was nearly empty, but his spirit remained steady. Sometimes, when business was slow, he would think about the little girl with the prosthetic leg. Her smile had stayed in his mind, like sunlight through a window. He wondered if she was doing okay, but he never expected to see her again. For him, it was just another memory of a good deed done. One bright morning, Ethan was wiping grease off his hands when he heard the roar of an engine outside, but not a familiar one. A sleek black SUV rolled up to the garage, shining like glass under the sun. Ethan frowned, thinking it was lost. The door opened, and two men in sharp black suits stepped out, followed by a woman in elegant attire and a young girl, the same girl from before. For a second, Ethan froze in disbelief, his wrench slipping from his hand. "Lila," he said softly, almost unsure. The girl's face lit up instantly. "Mr. Ethan," she shouted, running toward him with a wide smile. Her movements were smooth and confident, her new leg gleaming silver and white. Ethan knelt to greet her, still shocked. Grace, her mother, approached with a calm, grateful smile. She looked different now, refined, confident, her hair styled neatly. The two men stood quietly behind her, clearly bodyguards. "We wanted to see you again," she said warmly. "You may not remember us, but you helped my daughter when no one else would." Ethan nodded awkwardly, wiping his hands on his rag. "I remember," he replied gently. "How's the leg holding up?" Lila grinned, lifting her pant leg slightly to show the polished new prosthetic. "It's perfect. We got a new one, but it works even better because of how you fixed the old one first." Ethan smiled proudly, still unaware of why they were here. Grace gestured to the SUV, and one of the suited men handed her a small white envelope with gold trim. She stepped forward and offered it to Ethan. "This is for you," she said. "A small token of gratitude for your kindness." Ethan hesitated. "Ma'am, that's not necessary," he said, already shaking his head. But Grace insisted. "Please, open it." Slowly, Ethan tore the envelope open. Inside was a check made out to him for $100,000. His eyes widened, his hands trembling as he stared at the number. This must be a mistake," he stammered. Grace smiled gently. "It's no mistake, Ethan. My daughter told me what you said, that kindness is worth more than money. But people like you deserve to be rewarded. You didn't just fix her leg. You gave her confidence again." Ethan's throat tightened. He tried to hand it back, but Grace stopped him. "You have no idea who we are, do you?" she asked softly. Ethan looked confused. "No, ma'am. Just a mum and her daughter who needed help." Grace nodded slowly, almost moved by his humility. "I'm Grace Miller, CEO of Miller Tech Industries," she said quietly. "We develop prosthetic technology, the very same kind you repaired that day." Ethan blinked, struggling to process the words. The broken leg he had fixed belonged to the daughter of one of the most successful businesswomen in the country. I didn't know," Ethan whispered, his voice cracking. Grace smiled kindly. "That's what made your act so genuine. You didn't see money or status, just a child in need." She looked around the dusty old garage, the cracked floor, the flickering lights, the tools held together with tape. "You've been helping people selflessly, Now it's time someone helps you." She stepped aside as one of the men brought forward a folder filled with documents. "This," she said, "is the deed to this garage, fully paid off, plus a contract offer. We want to partner with you to repair and design custom mechanical parts for children's prosthetics." Ethan stood speechless, his heart racing. The air felt heavy around him, almost unreal. "You want me to work with your company?" he asked, disbelief in every word. Grace nodded. "Yes, we've seen what you can do with limited resources. Imagine what you could do with real equipment, proper funding, and a team." Lila tugged on Ethan's sleeve, smiling brightly. "Mom says you're the reason I'm walking again. I told her you should work with us." Ethan couldn't help but laugh through the lump in his throat. "You really are something, kiddo," he said softly. The sound of gratitude filled the small space as Grace reached out her hand. Ethan hesitated, then shook it firmly, his rough hand meeting hers. "I don't know what to say," he murmured. "Say yes," she replied with a warm smile, "and promise you'll keep helping others like you helped us." Ethan nodded, overwhelmed with emotion. The bodyguards loaded a few boxes into the garage. Inside were brand new tools, safety gear, and a state-of-the-art welding set. Grace handed him her business card and said, "Welcome to the team, Mr. Parker." When the SUV finally drove away, Ethan stood alone in the quiet, holding the envelope and the card. The sunlight streamed through the open garage door, catching the dust in golden streaks. For a long time, he just stared at his old workbench, the same one where he had repaired Lila's leg with scraps and heart. He sat down slowly, the check still trembling in his hands. A deep sense of gratitude filled his chest, mixed with disbelief and pride. He had never imagined that one small act of kindness could ripple back to him in such a powerful way. As evening fell, Ethan locked up the garage and looked toward the horizon. The same streets that once felt cold and empty now seemed full of possibility. He smiled softly, whispering to himself, "Guess good things really do come around." Inside his pocket, the check and Grace's card rested side by side, reminders that sometimes the universe rewards the kindest hearts when they least expect it. The hum of the town faded into the night, but in Ethan's heart, something new had begun, not just hope, but purpose. Weeks passed since Grace Miller's visit, and Ethan's life began to change in ways he never dreamed of. His old garage, once dusty and nearly falling apart, was now buzzing with activity. Brand new equipment lined the walls, precision tools, 3D printers, and machines that could shape metals he'd never even worked with before. Grace's company had transformed the place into a small research workshop. Ethan now worked officially as a mechanical consultant, designing and repairing prosthetic components for children. But despite the success, he remained the same humble man who once fixed a leg for free. Every morning he arrived early, wearing the same grey overalls, though cleaner now. He brewed his coffee, turned on the lights, and looked around proudly. What had once been quiet and lonely now echoed with the sound of progress. Engineers talking, machines humming, and laughter filling the air. Lila often visited after school, sometimes bringing cookies or lemonade. "Uncle Ethan," she would call out cheerfully, running up to him with a hug. Her energy was contagious, and Ethan loved how her visits brought warmth to everyone around. Grace made good on her promise too. She stayed in touch regularly, guiding Ethan through the business side of things, but always respecting his values. "We built this because of your heart," she told him once during a meeting. "We'll never let money come before compassion." Ethan smiled at that, knowing he had found not just success, but people who believed in what he stood for. He didn't care much for fame, but word of his story spread quickly. Soon, newspapers and online articles called him the mechanic with a golden heart. The first time a journalist came for an interview, Ethan felt awkward. Cameras flashed and questions poured in. How does it feel to go from broke to successful? What motivated your act of kindness? Ethan simply said, "I didn't do it expecting anything back. I just did what was right." His honesty touched millions who read about him. Donations began pouring in for the prosthetic project, and Grace expanded the operation into a full program that offered free repairs for children across several states. Ethan's little act had sparked something much bigger. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan stood outside the garage, watching a line of parents and children arrive for fittings. He greeted each one personally, remembering their names, their stories. One boy, missing his right leg, nervously approached him. "Will it hurt?" he asked quietly. Ethan knelt and smiled warmly. "Not one bit. We'll make sure it feels just right." That simple assurance melted the boy's fear. Moments like these reminded Ethan why he started. It was never about fame or fortune, but about giving people hope they thought they'd lost. Months later, Grace invited Ethan to attend a charity gala in New York City, where he was to be honored for his contributions. At first he refused. "I'm not a fancy suit kind of guy," he said, laughing. But Grace insisted, and eventually he agreed. That night, under glittering chandeliers and surrounded by people in elegant attire, Ethan felt out of place. Yet when Grace took the stage to speak, she pointed at him and said, "This man taught us that compassion can change the world." The entire room stood and applauded. Ethan's eyes filled with tears, humbled beyond words. After the event, Lila ran up to him in her new silver dress, smiling brightly. "Uncle Ethan, you were amazing," she said. Ethan chuckled softly, kneeling down. "You're the amazing one, kiddo. You're the reason this all started." She hugged him tightly, and for a brief moment everything else faded away. The crowd, the lights, the applause. Grace watched the scene quietly, her eyes glistening. She knew that no amount of money could buy what Ethan gave her and her daughter that day, faith in human kindness. Back in Maple Springs, life found its peaceful rhythm again. Ethan's garage continued to serve the community, but now with better tools, a small team, and a big heart. Children from nearby towns came regularly, and Ethan made sure every one of them left smiling. Sometimes he still worked late at night, fixing old cars for free or tuning engines just for fun. Even with all his success, he never forgot his roots. When people asked why he didn't move to a bigger city, he'd simply say, "Because this town gave me everything I needed, purpose and people." Years later, on a quiet summer afternoon, Ethan stood at the edge of his garage, watching Lila, now a teenager, helping another child walk with a newly fitted prosthetic leg. Her grace and confidence made him proud. Grace approached from behind and said softly, "She wants to study biomedical engineering." Ethan smiled. "She'll do great. She's got heart, just like her mom." Grace placed a hand on his shoulder. "No, Ethan, just like you." The moment hung in silence, filled with mutual respect and gratitude that words could never fully express. As the day ended, Ethan sat by the workbench, the same one he had once used to fix Lila's broken leg years ago. He traced the old scratches and burn marks with his finger, remembering how everything began. A rainy afternoon, a worried mother, and a little girl who couldn't walk. He smiled softly to himself. Life had given him more than he ever dreamed, not because he chased riches, but because he followed kindness. Outside, the sun dipped below the hills, painting the sky gold and pink, a quiet reminder that good hearts always shine, even in the simplest of places.